Folks, welcome to the podcast Freedom Fighter 1776. I'm your host, Mark Charles Bashaw. We're continuing forth with the natural law series. Last week we had Luke Weinhagen on. The week before that, we had Brandon Hayes on. And so we're bringing fellows from the Natural Law Institute on to give some presentations on fundamentals, the fundamentals of law and our societal structures in which things are supposed to work, but have been over time subverted and manipulated into believing something else or a distortion of reality. And so today we have a wonderful guest, again, freedom fighter of his own, Noah Revoy. Noah Revoy is an author, and I have his book right here. Outstanding book. I don't know if you could see that. There you go. I'll put a link in the description as well. He's an author, a public speaker, and a coach specializing in personal development, natural law, and proprietarian principles. As a fellow at the Natural Law Institute, he works alongside Kurt Doolittle to restore law systems of maturity, responsibility, and self-governance. Noah helps individuals break free from the dysfunction caused by modernity, where traditional maturity structures have collapsed, leaving people emotionally stunted and incapable of leading strong families or communities. His work focuses on self-discipline, emotional mastery, and reintroducing ancestral wisdom to ensure future generations grow up resilient, and competent. Noah, welcome to the show. Appreciate you coming on, brother. How are you?
I'm doing fine. This is great. I love doing podcasts.
Yeah, it's awesome, man. So today you've got a presentation for us. The topic of this presentation is the collapse of traditional maturity and how to restore it. So you're going to bring some solutions to the table. Before we get started, just give us a little bit more background on yourself.
Yeah, so when I was younger, I was raised to be a minister. And so I had a lot of training in how to speak properly, in how to reach out to different audiences. And because most of the world is clusters around the middle and are pretty ordinary, I was really taught how to say things that are very complex in very ordinary ways, very easy to understand ways. And I think this has really helped me a lot through my entire life. When I came to Portugal, I now live in Portugal, moved from Canada to Portugal. I got married, moved here, and I realized that, it's a different economy. I needed to find something different to do. And I started doing, at first, business coaching. But it turned out that almost all business problems are really problems of the individuals running the business's personal life and personal inadequacies flowing over into their business. And so I started helping them more and more with their personal life until it came to a point where that was the majority of what I was doing. And when around the time I had my first kid, I decided, no, I'm going to switch completely over to that, because that really was what my calling was. Making GDP go up was fun,
right?
But making people's lives better, that's where I got real satisfaction.
Amen. So what is it? What's your primary focus these days? Like, what's your day-to-day look like, and how do you navigate that space and working with some clients? And can you give some, some examples of some of the best case scenarios you've seen and some of the worst case scenarios?
So I split my time roughly 50-50 between charitable work and paid work. So a lot of the charitable work I do is also how I get my name out there as well. So it has some marketing value, but it's telling me I have a meeting with you. So what I do during that is I write articles. I take the ideas that I'm working on with clients and I simplify them down and I make them widely available to the public. Sometimes that means writing a book like the one that you showed earlier, but it also means producing a lot of content on social media that I give away for free. And I do this because I know most people can't afford to work with me. And those that can afford to work with me, they usually come with already a lot of success in life. And it's those individuals who have very good success, say, in their career, but in their personal life, they're blocked. They're having a hard time with their relationship with their spouse, or they're having a hard time adjusting to parenthood. And these are the kind of people that I normally work with. And usually, I have 3 or 4 calls a day, but I only take on 2 to 3 new clients a month maximum because of the intensity of the work. You have to really work intensely with people and move them quickly into a position where they feel competent. It's the opposite of therapy where you're there for 3 or 4 years. With me, it's somewhere between 3 months to 9 months, and you don't need help. Excuse me, you don't need help anymore. And that's the idea. Teach people how to help themselves, how to have sovereignty over their own lives, because most people do not need therapy. They're not broken. There's nothing wrong with them. They're just blocked, and they're lacking in the kind of things that they would have learned if they'd been parented properly.
And would you say your primary client base is male and female, or male or
Yeah, I have
female?
about 2/3 men and 1/3 women. And most of
Gotcha.
the women that are my clients are women that are on the far high end of IQ, and so they tend to be more organized in the way their thinking is. Some might call that more masculine. And they find, actually, those women find a very difficult time with relationships quite often. You'd think it would be easier for them because they understand men better, but men don't tend to understand them very well because they don't behave as stereotypically women would behave. And so they come to me and they say, I'm successful in my career, I'm successful at managing my money, but all these things that I do to make my life successful financially don't work in relationships. What am I doing wrong? And I help them through that process, because when it comes to career, women can emulate a man, and it can work. But when it comes to relationships, if they emulate male behavior, it's guaranteed failure. They'll only find men that they don't want in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So present day in the society we find ourselves in, where reality is flipped on its head, are you coming across more and more people that are having like these these crises of where they're finding that out and trying to work through the situation? Because we have a system now that'll swallow them up, that'll feed psychotropics to them, and then it'll get them all twisted up. But it sounds like your and what you do is the antithesis to that.
Yes. Yeah, you're not broken. You're just not complete. And once you achieve completeness, then you're capable of doing everything you need to do. And once you can do what you need to do, you don't feel that stress and anxiety of being incomplete anymore. I have guys come to me and they've already got 2 or 3 kids. And they say to me, like, I don't even feel like a man yet. I don't feel like I'm an adult. And I'm raising children, and this is too much for me, and I don't know what to do. And they'll come feeling sorry for themselves, and they'll leave feeling powerful. Usually they'll come to some sort of, because we push them to get into the right position for this. They'll come have some sort of, it's almost like a coming of age ritual, but in your 30s, where you go, no, I am the owner of my life, and I'm going to take full responsibility for it. And it's usually at some crisis moment, and it changes them forever. I'm a big believer in allowing crisis to happen when it can move you forward. You
It's
might
almost
say,
like
yeah, in a military
rock
sense,
bottom.
it's allow the fight to happen when you know you're going to win.
Yeah, it's almost like it's like a rock bottom, and from bottom, there's only way to go is up.
Yes,
and in the hopes that they don't self-eliminate before they are able to take those steps to go up.
This is why you have to have the programming to deal with the crisis before the crisis comes. But the crisis forces you to then use that programming. And I for unfortunate reasons, I was raised amongst constant crisis. So every 6 months a major crisis, every 3 months a minor crisis. And I grew up almost not knowing how to live without a crisis coming up. And it drove change, it drove evolution and maturity and growth, because the environment around me was unstable, and therefore I had to be stable. So I had to grow up quickly. And so I know how to use that for people to help them to go to that next level. But the thing is our brains are designed to maintain the status quo. We're alive right now. Why should I change anything? If I change, I could be dead. Right. Don't move unless you have to move, basically. And the crisis says, no, the place you're in right now will get you killed. You need to move.
I mean, there's in my opinion, there's never been such a time where that's so overtly obvious, where you've almost got two timelines. You've got a timeline of individuals who are discerning and navigating and going in and out of these crises and growing from them. And then you've got the other timeline where they're perfectly comfortable, and that comfortability is factually killing them because they're injecting themselves 7 or 8 more times with something the government says is going to be safe and effective for them, when reality is they're getting turbo cancers, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, I could go down, I could go on a rant. I could go on a rant. You know me, I could go on a rant.
This is why I wrote my book. Was at the time of mass global manipulation. I tried to inoculate people against the real problem, which was the manipulation.
I know one of the chapters in here talked about the immunization against manipulation. I like how you framed that. What year did this come out?
This came out, I think, 2 years ago now.
Yeah, 2022.
I started writing it during the epidemic, and then it came out after.
Oh, it was perfect timing. Perfect timing.
I actually think the crisis that was caused by that has set off a ripple in the public consciousness, where people for the first time are saying, maybe I can't trust all those institutions. I mean, some of the stuff that Trump does looks a little weird until you go, he could just be, and I think he is to some extent, a total normie who thinks that everything that's official was trustable. And he's just starting to realize this now. You see this with Elon Musk, where he'll be like, wow, I found corruption in government and I can't believe it. They're just coming to the realization that the rest of us did 20 years ago, that the government shot.
Yeah. And then, and now everybody's kind of exposed to that in one way or another, and the hypocrisy of what they've led to believe because of the immense enormity of alternative media taking over and social media taking over versus mainstream media. But there is still a huge populace that is, when I talk about, I think brainwashing is giving it, is saying it too lightly. Mm-hmm. I don't know what to call it, but I had a family member the other day wrote me something, and I had a different assumption on where they were headed consciousnessly. And I was like completely wrong based upon what they wrote. And I was just baffled by what they wrote. I had to go on a rant about the psychological operations that were manipulating them X, Y, and Z. And it's like, they don't hear that. They can't interpret that.
Unless you've been exposed to evil, it's very difficult to understand the depths of it. One of the, you could call it a benefit. It wasn't really the best situation at the time. But as a minister, I started working as a minister at 15. And my assignment was to minister to the drug addicts, the prostitutes, the drug dealers, the mentally ill, and the homeless that were in the city I was living in. So I got I was the junior guy, so I got the worst job, of course. And that, the
best job, really.
15 to 19, I worked that particular population. For example, none of the prostitutes that were there at the beginning were still alive at the end. They were all gone. A lot of them just disappeared, right. But I'm sure they didn't move to another city. They disappeared. Most of the drug addicts weren't around anymore. And like half of the homeless and mentally ill weren't around. And when you see how they're all preying on each other. None of them are innocent victims in this. They're all preying on each other. And it's an entirely different world than your average suburban family is going to see. And people don't understand that depth of evil because they're not exposed to it. If you are exposed to it, you start to realize that you need to check your assumptions about everything. You need to be sure what you believe, because if you believe the wrong thing and push comes to shove and you're delusional, you're going to be dead.
That brings up a good point about just the nonstop deceptions. I say from time to time, I say, listen, if you don't submit and tap into God-given discernment, you're going to be left to the deceptions and the delusions that are attacking you. And if you give it over and you submit and you ask for those eyes to see and ears to hear, you're now on a path of actually taking the power and carrying out some sort of self-control over the, at least at least start questioning, at least they start questioning, um, and going from there. I do want to talk about, we talked about the collapse of traditional maturity. What does that look like? What is that? What is your frame of that?
So
And
let
then
me,
what are the solutions that you're implementing with your clients for that? But also people listening, what can they implement?
so I remember when I was a child in the late 80s, my great grandmother, who was born around the turn of the century, she was talking to me and she said, when I was 16, I was already mature enough to do everything an adult would need to do. I could run a household, I could take care of kids, I could balance a budget, all the things that she would have to do eventually as a mother and a wife. And she says women today can be 36 and they still haven't mastered those things. And she would talk to me about this, how, first of all, I had to pick, she was wanting me to make sure I picked well when I got married. But also, it was a mystery to her because she says, I taught my children everything they needed to know to be adults. But somewhere between her generation and the end of the boomers, we lost that. And the parents were trying to teach the kids weren't often picking it up. There were the war damaged generation from the Second World War, were a little more distant from their kids, but there were a lot of parents teaching the children. But see, even my great grandmother would say to me, the difference is that your primary source of information as a child in 1900 was your parents and your church. Your primary source of information by 1950, just half a century later, was the government through public schools and mass media. And so the source of what is authority changed from familial and religious authority to a secular authority that did not have your best interests at heart. It was there to serve its own interest. And when that shift happened, we lost all of this ancestral wisdom about how to manage relationships, how to manage families, how to raise children to competency. Now people are like, I got to keep my kid alive till they're 18 and I can kick them out and then I've won. I've
Right.
completed my mission.
Right.
And they don't realize that the goal isn't to keep the kid alive. The goal is for them to reach competence, reproduce, and teach their children competence. You've only won when your grandkids are competent adults.
What's interesting too is modern day society, this modern day, I, I don't know, matrix, I guess you want to call it. Their primary prey is your sound of mindness and your
Mhm.
competence.
Yes.
Because if you give that up and you don't even, or you don't possess that, then you can't wield the power that tells them what to do, that instructs them how to, in our case, a constitutional republic, how to govern. And so that's their greatest target is your mind and your competence. And if they can discredit you in that process, then they've essentially won by slapping labels on you, calling us conspiracy theorists, right? I'm sure there's people listening to this that might say, we're conspiracy theorists, even though it's a very logical, sound, rational display of information that we're putting out there.
But a conspiracy doesn't require everybody involved to get together and keep it a secret and talk to each other in a big group and plan it out. They simply act on aligned incentives and work together, for each one's working for their own benefit, but it happens to take society in a certain direction. For predatory people, a world where people are less competent is an easier world to deal with. Now, I'll give you a simple example. They've interviewed pedophiles and say to them, what's the thing that was most likely to prevent you from attacking this particular child? I said, well, if he's got a father, that was a huge preventative measure, especially if that man is someone that's dangerous. So I saw that man as a potential threat. I'd leave the kid alone. And
Wow.
the thing is,
Yeah.
society doesn't have a father right now. Where are the fathers?
Right.
The place that we're in right now, we should never have gotten in the first place, because about 70, 80 years ago, the men should have stood up and said, nope, this isn't going to happen, and put an end to it directly.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't happen. The abandonment of the masculine responsibility to protect your civilization, even when your civilization doesn't want it and isn't grateful for it, disappeared. We no longer had it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We had Brandon on, and I asked Luke this too. Brandon says, and I believe he's correct. I mean, I think you're, on the same page too, but he says the corruption is total. The saturation of the corruption is total.
Yes.
And so would you say that we're at such a boiling point that a lot of this, I mean, it's creating that uncomfortability for people to search out this information and figure out what the hell's going on here?
We're hitting that rock bottom that we need to make the change. The status quo has to be so painful for people that they simply cannot tolerate it anymore, and they open up the possibility to pick a different direction. Now, here's the key. We have to make sure they pick the right direction, because there's going to be predators there saying, here's a road to even worse outcomes, and we'd like you to take that one.
Right.
And so we have to be there to say, this is the right path, which means we have to be good at articulating the problem and our solution, and then we have to offer it to them in a way that they can digest.
Immunize them from the manipulation. That's I mean, that's a perfect term for it. Do you think there's a straw that breaks the camel's back? And what is that kind of straw that breaks the camel's back as far as a possible mass wide consciousness level moving into this realm?
So for it to move out to the 80% of people that are what I would call normies, you're going to need to have a nationwide crisis of some sort. I think that what's happening with Doge almost reached that level where people are realizing how bad the theft and government abuse has been. And wait till they get to the Department of Defense and all the rest of it and see how bad that is. It's going to be somewhat awakening. But the news is, of course, going to blunt the effects of that. It needs to be felt in the flesh. You can't explain to a drug addict all the suffering he's going to have. You just have to let him suffer.
Yeah, it's like, scar tissue. Build that scar tissue. From that scar tissue. I mean, I know from my own personal experiences, it's the scar tissue, and it's then, allowed me to grow, get burned by a hot stove. And, you can fall down and just lay down and do nothing, or you can grow from it and keep on moving. You talk about
some people will never wake up.
I mean, it's evident they're self-eliminating.
Yeah.
It's a dangerous time.
And you talk about self-eliminating. Some of them are still alive, but they're living in such a way that they might as well be dead.
Well, I was talking with a buddy the other day about just this fact. They're literally walking zombies. They're shells.
Yeah.
There is no possible way for them to entertain, they don't even entertain critical thought process.
Mm-hmm.
It's like their eyes are glazed over. They just look at you like you got 10 heads. And it's like, I thought I said something pretty rational and backed it up with a crap load of evidence, but nothing. No, they got to wait for the 5 o'clock news to come on.
If you don't teach a kid how to speak by the time he's 7, it's almost impossible to teach him later on. So, kids that were raised either in abusive situations or, raised by, there have been kids raised by animals in the jungle, not just the jungle, but it actually happens occasionally. Those kids usually don't learn to speak, even when they come back into civilization, and they can be given the best possible care. It's just the part of the brain that allows them to process language never developed. And so the brain used that for other purposes. Our brain's incredibly plastic, and it'll end up making use of that space for some other use. Well, the part of people's brain that allows them to think rationally, and a big part of that is for them to calculate what are the long-term effects of the decision I'm supposed to make. That's developed in childhood. So part of it is, if you throw a ball and you can calculate our rock, I can throw this rock, I'm running, the rabbit's running, I'm going to throw the rock, I'm going to hit the rabbit. The thing that people, kids today have no jobs, but it used to be, if you were a kid, your job was to find anything edible that it was around the tribe, kill it and bring it home. that was your school.
Right.
And if I can make that projection, I'm exercising the same part of my brain that says, what if I make friends with this person? Will I need their help later? It's all the same projection of the future is used in that calculation of where I'm throwing the rock and all of the moving variables. Well, we don't do that anymore. Kids sit playing video games all day long.
Mm.
Or they're even more passive. They're on social media.
Yep.
And now you ask your average, when I was a kid, I used to do this all the time. We'd hunt rabbits, and we used to catch them live. That was what we'd catch them with a net.
Oh,
How fast a rabbit is.
Yeah,
and we'd be after them with like a little fishing net, and we'd catch them, net them, kind of like tame them and let them go, and then catch them again later. And it was, we weren't allowed to kill too many of them. We do it occasionally and eat them, but most of the time we just chase them and run around. Same with ducks and other things. And it's just that boy's natural desire to hunt. And it taught us things, and in school we had bullies. We had to learn how to navigate other kids that were dangerous, that were often older than us. We had to, in grade school, I think I was in grade 6, I organized a bunch of the other kids to form a gang and beat up the bullies that were coming from bigger schools because they were too big for us to fight one-on-one.
Yeah.
And I had it completely organized. I went and looked up pirate constitutions, and I copied down what a pirate constitution was, and I had it written on one side of the paper, the rules. We couldn't be bullies. If you join us and you're a bully, we'll beat you up first. So you couldn't be a bully. You had to come when you were called to fight. You had to show up to fight. You had to be on guards. We set up guard stations and everyone watching for fights. And then you had 2 choices. You could sign the front of the paper, which meant that you paid in service. So in other words, you paid by helping us fight. Or you could sign the back of the paper and you paid $5 a month and we'd fight for you. And so most kids signed the front. $5 in the 1980s was more money.
That's a big deal. That's a huge deal.
Yeah. So we had a few kids that paid the money. Oh, and the other thing was we always protect the girls, and they don't have to be part of the pack.
Right.
Girls shouldn't be fighting. And we set this up, and I ended up with about 50 kids joining. The last time when I was in that school that there was any fighting was when some kids came to pick on kids from our school. They would either pick on them or sell them drugs.
Right.
And we beat them up so bad that they had to take them away in an ambulance. And after that, nobody bothered our school anymore.
They just knew.
No, I got taken into the principal's office, and they said, "We heard you organized a gang." And I'm like, interesting. And he says, "Yeah." He said, "You can't be doing that. We're going to have to suspend you." And I said to them, you're suggesting to suspend me when you know that I've organized a gang of kids, maybe 50 kids, and you want to put me out of the school in the neighborhoods where you live and where your houses and cars are without any supervision? I don't think that's a good idea. And they were like thinking about it, and they decided not to suspend me because they prefer I was at school where they could keep an eye on me. Where you could manage the protection gang of their school so they could continue generating the revenue they need to secure their jobs. If you're getting picked on, go tell a teacher. I tell a teacher, and the teachers never cared. Yeah. So I decided that if the adults weren't going to do their job, that the responsibility fell to me, because I could organize kids. I was taught how to organize people. Yeah. So I did. Well, I think at that point in time,
you, the lesser magistrate, turned into the higher magistrate. The adults turned into children. You became the adult. You're essentially running the school.
We even, and I won't go into details about it, but we caused them to have to reassign a pedophile that was working on the school to another location for his own safety. So we got this guy out who had abused, at least that we knew of, 50 kids, because that came out in the news.
Wow.
And we forced them to move him for his own safety.
Where, so, and if you don't want to answer this, you don't have to, but where did you grow up? Where was this
school? Kitchener, Ontario.
In Ontario?
It's in Ontario, Canada. So it's a double city. So like two cities grew into one, and one side is a university town, and that's nice. And then the other side is a blue collar town. And it was pretty good growing up. It was mostly German. And it was, everyone pretty much followed rules. Fighting happened if you chose to fight. You didn't have to. And then we had a lot of people move in from Newfoundland, and they were Scots-Irish. And fighting was how they communicated. So, they greet you by punching you in the face. And it was a completely new language that we weren't used to. And I got used to it pretty quick. A lot of the kids had a hard time because they were German background, and they were like rule following. If you were told not to fight, you don't fight no matter what.
Right.
And the Scots-Irish kids just thought that was funny because that meant they could pick on you and you couldn't do anything. And when we'd fight back, all of a sudden you'd get respect. You fight back, you get respect, and everything was fine.
So you recruited them.
Yeah, so I recruited them. I got them to help protect everybody else. And awesome. It worked out. The crime rate is way underreported in Canada. So Canadians will tell you, oh, there's no gun crime there. I've seen, as a child, I saw several people getting shot. Mm-hmm. A couple of times I heard it, and then I know later because the news came out that someone was shot. But I saw people run into a house and guns go off. And then people come out of the house, and the police came later, but it was never in the news.
Wow.
And I talked to police officers about this, and they said, oh, yeah, the crime rate is fake. The numbers are all fake.
So going back to the public schooling, right? Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like a prison camp,
Yes.
The same thing.
It infantilizes you as well. Because it infantilizes you because they won't let you solve the problem.
Right. Yeah.
And there's not many kids like me that can organize the kids and sufficiently threaten the adults to allow us to organize them.
Right.
So most of the time, it just ends up infantilizing them. No one's allowed to solve their own problems.
Yeah, they shut it down. Sounds like the military.
Yeah.
Bring up problems, and then they shut you down. You become the problem.
Yes.
They shut you down. Talk about, going back to this, the collapse of traditional maturity, and basically what we've been talking about in general. Talk about, what self-parenting, what's that mean, and how people can start that process.
Yeah. So if we weren't blessed with parents that told us everything or taught us everything we needed to know, and most of us weren't. In fact, I think in history, most of the time, our parents weren't the ones that were even responsible perhaps for the majority of our training. If you go back a few generations ago, we lived in villages, and we had our dad, and then we also had our uncles, and we had our grandfathers from both sides of the family, and we had our older cousins, and maybe we had older brothers. And between that wealth of masculine maturity above us, we would get taught everything we needed to know to be competent men. And it wasn't just a burden on our father, because no matter how good our father is, he's going to have his shortcomings. And that way, when we have those choices, we get to learn different things from different men. Now, if we haven't been blessed with that as a youth, we have to create that for ourselves. So what I like to do is go through an exercise with people where I say, if you were your own father, not the actual father you had, but if you were going to father yourself, what advice would you give yourself on the subject that they're asking about? What would you say is missing in your life from that perspective? What I'm trying to do is help them get into this kind of meta-father perspective where they are, we talk about patriarchy. That is it. That's where you think like a a meta father, and then you guide yourself and those around you from that perspective. And for women, I do the same, and I say they should be in the meta mother perspective. So I'll have a woman, she's dating a guy, and she describes the guy, and it's very clear that she should break up with this guy. And I will say to her, if you were a mother and your daughter came to you and said, this is the guy I'm dating, what would your advice be? Oh, I'd break up with him immediately. I said, okay,
Right.
so what do you think you should do? And that now it makes sense to them.
Yeah.
But we tend, because, you know, if you weren't taught what you need, it's likely you were also not given enough attention and love as a kid as well.
Mm-hmm.
You need to give yourself that attention. You need to spend that attention on yourself to finish your development and maturity. And you don't have to go farther than your current requirements. You know, you're a father, I'm a father. So we need to be able to manage marriage and children. But if you're a single guy, you just need to be able to manage that. Be as mature as you need for your job. And you need a system. And that's what I actually teach people, a system. I use this book, which isn't available to the general public. It's one I wrote. And I use it to teach people a system to allow themselves to reach maturity. There are questions you need to ask yourself. It's the same questions a good father asks their children. I wrote an article today, 10 questions you should be discussing with your children. And they're questions like, who am I? People today don't have an identity. And that's the job of our parents, to help us have an identity. You know, that's one thing my parents did well. We had a family identity, and it shaped who I was.
Or they get stuck in the identity of the label in which was assigned to them, but they never get to the root of who they actually are. It's like when you ask somebody, who are you? They give you their name. And it's like, but they don't know, you know, their creation, they're a creation. And what is that creation? And that's why, you know, I'm a man, you know, created by God. But that's why there's such an attack on these biological truths, because they want people perpetually confused about who they really are. And so they can subvert you with the labels they're going to slap on you. And that's why this
is why we also want to ask our child, you know, I'll talk to my sons and I'll say, you're boys and you're going to grow up to be men, and probably husbands and fathers. And what does that mean? What does it mean to be a boy? How is that different from being a girl? And of course, normally kids will be like, well, you know, girls look different. And okay, but beyond appearance, what is the differences? What do you notice are the differences between how boys and girls behave? And by getting them to think about these questions, these are Socratic questions. These are helping children to develop their understanding of where they are in the world. So identity is who you are, but identity is also connected to other people. So our identity overlaps. I mean, we're talking today because we have some overlapping identity. And that's how we met, because there are things about us that are similar, in which we describe ourselves similarly, and therefore we have enough similarity to have a conversation, even something as simple as we both speak English. So there are all these overlapping identities, and it's not just who you are, but it's what is your relationship to the world and to other people. And we send kids off to school without having answered this question, and the school is there to answer the question. You're whatever you want to be.
Yeah.
As long as we agree with it.
And then it goes back to what you said, like, you should be able to have a conversation just if you speak the same language, but we're at a point now we can't even have a conversation even if we speak the same language, because the other receiver of the language of the message might have been programmed completely with a false reality, to where you legitimately can't even have a conversation, because their definitions of the words you use aren't even the same. And so you go into it assuming that your dictation is their dictation, when really they've been programmed in these government funded programs to think completely something else.
Yes.
And that's why recently in my communications, in my lawful communications, in my redresses of whoever it is I'm having to redress, I put a glossary for the words I use. So they have to use the frames in which I put down, or they can challenge my frames, but they can't make an assumption towards my frames. And that's what we're dealing with, is this assumption that, one, on my end, they know the same definition I know and have the same meaning, when really I could be talking to somebody that's way off, way off,
Yes, I
or
was
vice
working on
versa.
some marketing issues, and I said something about truth, and one of the other people said, "Yeah, that's a really tough word right now, because some people understand it the way we do, where it's absolute truth. It means what you can prove is true and testify to, and other people are like, it's my opinion, man, you know, and that's their truth." And so there, we were like trying to think of another word, and we thought about reality, and like, no, they did the same thing to that word, and they've
What
messed the words up, the language up so badly that it's inhibited communication between the various tribes, political tribes. They can't communicate anymore.
One of the best words and the definitions of the word I find is reason,
Mhm.
a faculty of the faculty of the mind to deduce truth from falsehood. And they've you ask somebody what does reason mean? Well, why? Like, and it's an opinion based thing to them. But
Mhm.
no, it's your sound of mindness. It's your competence to be able to deduce truth from falsehood. And we're living in such time where you've got public servants flying foreign belligerent flags of gender dysphoria, or whatever the hell you want to call it, on publicly owned property, and psychologically operating on the body politic, or
Yeah.
on the commons, right? And and they think that's fine. Like, there is no reason for that. Like, you just showed you do not have the faculty of the mind to be able to deduce truth from falsehood, and you're just now blatantly flying your falsehoods.
And if we can't deal with them through conversation, then we need to escalate the pressure upon them. And this is why lawfare has become so popular, is because it's an escalation of force in getting them to correct their behavior. It would be great if we could have a conversation with them, a public or individual conversations, and they could come to reason, but they do not have the faculty of reason. You know, we mentioned earlier the schools programming kids. Well, here's the thing: if you don't program the ability to reason into your children before they go out into the world, someone else is going to fill that gap.
Mm, yep,
Anything you don't teach your kids, someone else is going to fill that gap. And
yep.
I want to program my kids before anyone else gets a chance to program them, because I'm going to program them into sovereignty, and into reason, and into the ability to direct their own life rather than be a slave.
Amen. Yeah, amen. That's it. It's interesting now you mentioned the lawfare. You know, we've been doing the lawfare, whether it's on the military side of the house, or as a one of the people trying to properly instruct our form of government, and they really can't. There is no response to that. They can't respond to it. And so what do? They do their best to dismiss it, motion to dismiss, ignore it, pretend they didn't hear it. And I mean, we're at the point now where they're just belligerently signing off on their own crimes. And it's like you have the conversation, like, no, please don't do that. And that's why we go back to like the failure of maturity. We're literally talking to children, because it's like, hey, don't do that. And actually more children will listen to that. I don't even know what we're talking to here, because you have these conversations, then you bring in a witness with you, you say the same thing, and then it just in one ear out the other, then you put it down formally in communication in an email, right? And it's just not registering. And then you formally serve them with the paperwork or whatever it is, the lawfare that you're putting in front of their face, and they just sign, and then they just start retaliating like children. Like, we're worse than children. I can't even. I
Well,
think,
the reason that the lawfare is more effective than the conversation is because on the continuum of force, it's more towards the violence side and less towards the talking side.
yeah,
Because the courts are backed by law, and law
right.
is just violence legalized. That's all
Yeah.
that it is.
And I mean, and we're just checking boxes,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, it's a continuum. You have to keep moving on the continuum until you've exhausted all possibilities
Right.
in that part of the continuum, and then you move to the next phase.
Yeah.
And the farther we get along there, there'll come a point where they're so unable to respond that we win.
Right. I tell everybody, don't skip steps.
Yeah.
Don't skip steps. Don't skip to number 2 if you haven't done number 1.
Yes.
Number 1, there's a lot of number 1, redress your grievances, and there's many ways to do that, and we haven't exhausted those. So
No, people will complain about how long it takes because they have no historical perspective. Again, it's immaturity.
yep.
If you look at the American Revolution, for example, there was a period of about 30 years of intense attempts to redress grievances on the part of the colonials before they met to write the Declaration of Independence.
Oh,
And
yeah.
even that, it was a little while after that before any conflict began.
Yep.
We're really just in the beginning or middle of that redress of grievance phase. We still have
Yeah.
lots to do. And in
Yeah.
fact, with Trump seeming in some ways, with Doge perhaps to be looking at certain issues of that.
Your audio just cut out.
Oh, my audio cut out? Is it still out? Well, that's weird.
He's working his audio. While he works his audio, in the last few minutes here, we're going to talk about reintroducing law systems, maturity into families. And so, what can somebody do listening, realize they're stuck in this cycle? What is the first step they should take, right? And then also talk about self-governance and natural law. So if y'all want to go over naturallawinstitute.org, check that out. And go over to Noah's website as well. Check him out. He's also got a social media account. So follow, all those things. Get a hold of him if you want to start working some of these what we could call healing modalities to maturity and adulthood. I don't know if he's got his audio back.
It says it's working.
It's still cut out.
I think it's your headphones.
Okay.
I think it's the headphones.
I can't hear you on your end. So, folks, check us out, freedomfighter1776.com. We're going to end it. We're definitely going to have Noah back. This is a fascinating discussion. Check out his book. Go get yourself a copy. Become immunized to the manipulation. And check out freedomfighter1776.com. You can get more information over there. Anyway, God bless. Much love. We'll check you out on the next episode.